Hi, everyone, and welcome to State of State, a Penn State football show presented by FanDuel. Play your game. I'm Tom Hannifan. He is Nittany Lion legend, former Penn State wide receiver Deon Butler, sitting in for Justin King for the remainder of the season. Penn State remains on its path towards potentially accomplishing bowl eligibility. They improve to 5-6 on the year. Penn State beats 7-3, now 7-4 Nebraska by a score of 37-10 at home at night in a whiteout on senior night. A lot of emotions, a lot of positives to take away from this. Some records either tied or broken. Congratulations to Nick Singleton, who tied Saquon Barkley for the all-time rushing touchdown record. And congratulations to Katron Allen, who is now the all-time leader in rushing yards in Penn State football history. So there's a lot to celebrate. There are a lot of emotions this week, Deon. You and I talked about it earlier on this week in terms of James Franklin gets his new job at Virginia Tech. Terry Smith, incredibly emotional earlier on this week. Senior night, some of the last time some of these players are ever going to put on a helmet and play. Obviously, the last time they'll get to play at Beaver Stadium. What this season could have been, all those things put together. And then you just dominate a team that was 7-3, as I mentioned, coming into this, granted playing with the backup quarterback, but Penn State handled Nebraska in this game. What was your overall takeaway from this game?
Right, I think they're continuing to build on the momentum that they've been having since they, started this last run of wins. And, it's been what we thought, right? Dominating in the trenches, right? Getting Katron going, getting Singleton going. And I think the missing piece that we've also been asking about or looking for is just chunk plays. I've always talked about explosive plays that either help you get, quick scores, or they help you at least change the field position, right? And, you and I were talking, and you look down the stat sheet, and there were a number of guys that had what you would consider 20 plus explosive plays that coaches want to have a certain amount of in a game. And we're starting to get that from the offensive side of the ball. And I think that just really gets everything rolling. And it just gives us a whole new look offensively. And like I say, he continues to Grunkemeyer take care of the ball, not turn it over. And then, the defense, I think it's something when you're playing with a lead, right? Like when you can hold strong. This defense has played good throughout the year, right? It's been times where it's been, kind of gotten worn down and offense wasn't giving you a thing and get back out there. But now you're getting touchdowns on the other end, and that gives defenses a lot more life. It gives probably, the coach knows a lot more flexibility in his calls and things like that. So I think, you're starting to see a complete team that really believes in themselves. And, we've talked about it too. I think they're really fighting for Coach Terry Smith, which is a great thing.
At one point, Beaver Stadium was chanting Terry. I mean, I can only imagine being a guy whose father was class of 68 Penn State, whose family, so many of them went to Penn State. Terry Smith went to Penn State, was a team captain, played for the team, comes on as a coach, has been the associate head coach for a long time. And it was talked about heavily on the broadcast by, Penn State legend Todd Blackledge and Noah Eagle about how this was a opportunity that Terry Smith didn't think was ever going to come, or at least ever come at this level. So being here as the interim head coach, it just means so much to him. I think that's very clear. And to keep Penn State on the path towards bowl eligibility, you still got to beat Rutgers on the road next week in order to become bowl eligible. So Penn State has plenty to play for there. But I don't think he ever could have imagined it under these circumstances. One thing with Terry, it was polarizing. It did get picked up on social media. I don't know if they mentioned it on the broadcast, but he was wearing a 409 Joe pin. And I say that's polarizing because as a longtime Penn State fan, someone who grew up as a fan of the team and attended the university, I love to see it. There are plenty of people, and I can understand why, who are not okay seeing something like that. I understand. But that is something different, something you did not see James Franklin do outside of his introductory press conference over a decade ago. What did you think about that as someone who played for Joe and Terry?
I think obviously, to your point, people are, respect everybody's opinion, but there's a difference for the guys that were in those locker rooms that played for Joe and that, really knew who he was and what he stood for and kind of probably what he helped you become as a man. And I think when you have that, there's a foundation that you have that you're not really too busy worried about what the outsiders think that weren't there. And once again, you respect their opinion, but they weren't there, they don't know. And you have that feeling of, this is the foundation, this is what I believe in, and it's strong. And when you always continue to hear people talk about he's bleeding blue and white, he's Penn State through and through, that's where it comes from. When you've grown up in this, when you believe in it, and you're not really too busy worried about the outsiders. You know what this university, this program, what it stands for, what it should be, where it needs to get to. And, seeing it is, I mean, it's refreshing, right? Because I'm obviously a huge supporter. And once again, I've been there, but it's one of those things also, right? I don't spend a lot of time talking to people about, because, unfair to them, they weren't in those locker rooms. They weren't there. They don't really know. So I have some insight that they don't. So, it's hard to have that conversation with a lot of people from the outside, but seeing that once again and not worried about the media or what they think, and like, this is Penn State, this is who we are, and Penn State proud. I loved it.
A reminder to all of our fans watching and listening, if you become a member of our YouTube channel, you can get all of our past and upcoming episodes ad-free, commercial-free for just 99 cents a month. Follow the link in the description of this podcast and become a member of the State of State YouTube channel. We're live on our YouTube right now, so hop in the comments section, offer us any of your questions or comments. Melinda here saying, who's the most impressive senior player today? I think my answer is Kaytron Allen. I think that's easy. He goes off for 25 carries, 160 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. Did he get involved catching? No, I didn't catch any passes, but still average 6.4 yards per carry, as we mentioned at the top here. Kaytron Allen is now the all-time leading rusher in the history of Penn State football. It's just astonishing to see the people that he went past, surpassing Saquon Barkley, who finished second in 3 years, which is pretty incredible. Evan Royster played his full 4 years. Kaytron, Nick played their full 4 years. So put Saquon's record in perspective. But for Kaytron to finish this thing is the number one rusher in Penn State history. And it's ironic because for the last year and a half, I think people have understood, and Kaytron has widened the gap between himself and Nick. But for the first 2 years, no one was really talking about number 13. Everybody was talking about Nick Singleton because of his fanfare out of high school. So for me, it's Kaytron Allen. Deon, I don't know how you feel about it.
No, I would say too, I think Kaytron. And I think that's just one of those things too, where it's almost like a picture of the season, right? He's been the stability throughout, even in the rough times. You knew you could get some carries from Kaytron. You knew what you were going to get with him. Tough, hard-nosed football. I think he's like the epitome of Penn State, having played with Evan Royster, who was the guy that he passed tonight, and understanding what that means. Evan was an amazing running back. So to put into perspective that, right, and that also talks about durability of guys, right? Durability over time. And so I think definitely him and what he did tonight just showed, like, this is the tough grittiness that he's had all these years. And I think, to your point, right, like, he came in kind of as an underdog. Like, obviously people knew him, but Nick was much flashier. When I say flashier, he's the speed guy. He's going to break off those long runs and not get caught, right? So everybody loves that as well. But I think he's just kind of been one of those guys, look, I come with my lunch pail, I work. And I think guys really started to gravitate towards that, where he wasn't too busy worried about other things, as far as kind of just the way he plays and the way he carries himself. Just reminds me of another guy, right? I played with Marshawn Lynch, as far as the guy who's not into a bunch of fanfare and I'm here to play ball. Obviously, he's a polarizing figure. But when you really get down to it, Marshawn was just about playing football. I want to play football. And I think Kaytron has a lot of those qualities where I don't know how much I've actually heard him talk with media and do time. It's not like it's been all over the place. He just here to play football. So I love that attitude.
Maddie in the comments section here saying, Kaytron, baby. Yeah, we're with you. This one's from @Penn State 51014. Allen and Singleton really stepped up this game, and Grunkemeyer continues to show improvement. I know things look rough for us now, but I think we're back on track again. I agree. Listen, like, the spread for this game, according to FanDuel, was 9.5 earlier on this week. It shrunk all the way down to 7.5, but it was in favor of Penn State. And you and I kind of talked about this. Deon was like, hey, this felt like, kind of a big number at first and almost disrespectful to what Nebraska has done so far this year. And you can look at the wins that they have. Is it against the top flight talent in the Big Ten? No, but still 7-3, impressive mark nonetheless. And then Penn State had just won its first Power 4 Big Ten win of the game of the year, this past weekend on the road in East Lansing. So it was kind of like, hey, has Penn State figured out who it is? Has it realized the potential that it had? So I thought, this would be a lot more competitive than 37-10. It was very impressive. And I think as good as Penn State was offensively, running the football was clearly the focal point of this. Grunkemeyer only was asked to throw the ball 12 times. He was 11 of 12 for 181 yards and a touchdown, 92% completion percentage. Every head coach in America will take that every single weekend. I understand that was probably the most Iowa game plan that's ever been put together. But Deon, who cares? It worked. And that you're just trying to get the win at this point.
Once again, I mean, that's the identity of this football team and not trying to shy away from it, right? I think that's one of the good things when, you talk about Coach Terry and that staff now, we don't need to try to change up week to week. Here's what we do. You need to stop us doing that, right? And to your point, I think we talked about seems like we've cut down on a lot of the shifts and motions. And, part of that is probably because he's a young quarterback. Another part, I think, is because, hey, let's just line up and play football. And I think we have the athletes to be able to do that. And so even now when you're seeing that and you break down the game plan and it's easier, it's just like, hey, these guys can line up and win football games. So I think it's really a good thing. And it's really about knowing who our identity is, really getting great at that and not trying to do too many other things to hide certain stuff. We run the football and you better be able to stop it. And if not, we'll get some chunk plays here and there. It's another thing. It almost reminds me of an early Russell Wilson game plan, right? When I was in Seattle, we didn't ask Russell to throw the ball a ton. Marshawn was going to run. You knew we were going to do that. And we were going to get some chunk plays with Russ, and then the defense was going to be good. But to your point about when you know who your team is, you don't have to shift and do things. Just do what we do it well. Doesn't have to be the best. As far as flashy, but hey, look, we're going to be able to do it, and you got to be able to stop us.
Even Michael Robinson, your former teammate and was on the NBC broadcast, Michael Robinson wasn't throwing the ball 40 times a game for video game numbers. He had a different skill set, albeit than Ethan Grunkemeyer, but they kept his attempts down. They made them manageable. Penn State ran the football, and obviously had killers at wide receiver at different positions that could really hurt you in the passing game, and a good offensive line. So it's just kind of the way that Penn State has worked for decades. And it's felt like since the Iowa game, Andy Kotelnicki's playbook has been simplified. And that's not saying that he's a bad play caller by any means. He clearly called a good game tonight, but you could feel the influence of Terry Smith as the weeks have gone on, getting rid of the gimmicks and the bells and whistles. Now, I don't know if Andy Kotelnicki is going to be a part of this staff in a couple of weeks. We're going to have to see, A, if Penn State becomes bowl eligible, B, who the next head coach is, all that sort of stuff. But you kind of see how his playbook has been reduced. And it's worked to the fact that Penn State had 39 attempts rushing to 12 passing attempts, 231 yards on the ground, 4 touchdowns, all of them by Catron and Singleton. And then 5.9 yards per carry. You got explosive plays to the degree of 26 yards rushing from Luke Reynolds, which was off of a 4th down fake punt, eerily reminiscent of the Minnesota game last year. Reynolds ran virtually the same play and saved that game for Penn State in the last few minutes. You get a 14-yard carry from Singleton. You get a 50-yard rush from Catron Allen. And then you talk about chunk plays. The passing game was largely defined by chunk plays. And you mentioned it a moment ago. 5 different players had what would be described as an explosive play in the receiving game. Trebor Pena for 29, Singleton for 50, Howard for 31, Devontae Ross for 28, Kyron Hudson for 20. I mean, if you're only going to have 12 attempts, it's exactly what you want. No notes. I got nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you make it count, right? And I mean, that's one of those things too, right? Obviously, when you're getting a heavy dosage of runs to that defense and you're wearing them down like that, play actions and everything get a lot easier. Those linebackers creep up to the line. It's that second layer, right behind them in front of the safety is it gets wide open. And, Grunkemeyer has shown a very natural, that throw over that second layer over the linebackers in front of the safeties or corners. He's just naturally, right? So it's just like one of those things where take advantage of that. And that's all you need to then back them up again or be able to once again change the field position and have that chunk play. And I mean, I think it works great. Like, you don't need to have him throw the ball 20 times. And that's, to me, playing to the strength of your guys, playing to the strength of the personnel you have, as opposed to trying to make them fit. And I'm not saying Koloniki did that before, but I just feel like now looking at it, it just looks like the guys that we have out there look totally different. I believe they're being asked to do different things.
We'll talk about the head coach search a little bit later on, but I do want to talk about the performance by the defense in this game. You and I talked about it a fair amount coming into this, and that I personally was a little bit concerned that TJ Lateef could hurt Penn State as a dual threat quarterback. And this was an odd game plan, it felt, by Nebraska, and that they clearly wanted to get the ball to Emmett Johnson, number 21, their star running back. And he had an outstanding game against UCLA. He had over 100 yards receiving and rushing in that game against the Bruins, a victory last weekend for Nebraska. And you could feel them want to go to him all over again. But Penn State clearly was like, we're going to take away your strength. And Penn State did a very nice job. The Johnson kid is wildly talented. I'd be very curious to see if he stays in Lincoln beyond this season. But they bottled him up, and then there didn't seem to be a lot of development for Lateef. And how could there be? He's a young quarterback. He's only just started a handful of games ever since Raiola went down. They didn't go to the quarterback run game or the option or RPOs. They really didn't want to do that. Instead, they had him drop back and throw 37 times in this game. Now, part of that is you're trying to make up the lead. Johnson is being, bottled up for the most part. Now, he still had 19 carries for 103 yards and 5.4 yards per carry, but that's still limiting him in that you're the only thing that's going to hurt us. Nothing else is going to hurt us. He had 8 catches for 48 yards on the night as well. So he got his yards, but it's kind of like playing the Golden State Warriors with Steph Curry, Deon. It's like, we'll let you get your numbers, but we're going to limit everything else. And Penn State did that. What did you see from what Knowles did, the way Knowles called this game?
No, I think they did a great job of that. Definitely the front four got pressure too, and got some of the secondary into some of those blitzes, right, to get some speed in there on him. But to your point, I think you literally touched on it earlier when you made a mention of Mike Robb and what we had him do. It's that. And that's not, I don't know the kid, but it's a tall task to say, hey, drop back as a drop back passer when, I think your best skill set is that you're a dual threat at the moment, right? And, drop back straight up and just start darting the ball all over the field, albeit as well that this is only a couple games into you starting. I think that was a tall task for him, and I think that really played into our hands, being able to get pressure on him, kind of confuse him. A lot of throws that I felt like were errant from him, but he was also just back there throwing a lot, which, to that point, right, I would have thought that I would have seen more, rollouts or, kind of have the field for him and then running as another option. But, hey, we're going to have him do a couple reads just here and there as opposed to just dropping back and get some movement going, especially how we had talked about earlier, how dual threat quarterbacks have given us problems earlier in the year. But, I'm not mad they didn't do that. It's just one of those things. But, we handled it very well on defense for what they posed to us.
They had him drop back, and it felt like the zone scheme that Penn State was putting out there was really creating problems for him. And again, a young quarterback reading and diagnosing is not necessarily going to be a strong suit. You could see at times they were trying to do the play action, have him move the pocket to reduce the pass rush. And even still, that's 1 or 2 reads max, and they're asking you to tuck it and run. The touchdown, ironically, that Lateef ran for, you could kind of see how Penn State struggled with that and trying to bottle him up. He's a good athlete. Had Nebraska maybe leaned into that a little bit more, they could have had success, but clearly that wasn't the case. I was very puzzled by their decision on the opening drive to go for it on, I think it was 4th and 1, and they get stonewalled by Zane Durant. Zane Durant, who had a hell of a game, denied Dennis Sutton, had a hell of a game defensively. This secondary was hitting, man. Like, we're biased towards lockdown you, Justin King, and Terry Smith on this podcast, but like, damn, man, like the secondary was laying the lumber in a way that, like, you haven't seen it a ton this season. It's developed the last few weeks, but it kind of comes back to something that was mentioned on the broadcast. And you and I talked about this a little bit before we came on. The NBC commentary team was saying that the team early in the year was trying to play perfect. And we're going to learn a lot more about what really happened this season with James Franklin, and internally, more and more is going to come out. But it just feels like this team is playing loose, and they're just playing ball. Deon, what has been the big difference that you've seen?
Once again, yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely playing hard. I think they're communicating, right? Like, I really think they're communicating better, whether it's they've got some more weeks to learn the defense or something, but they're communicating. I really feel like they're putting themselves in position to make plays. And I think that's one of the big keys. And then they're now actually starting to make those plays. But yeah, they are playing. It feels like looser. Obviously, right, there's not a national title on the line, but in saying that in the same sentence, there's also been, a rough season, so they could tank it. But this group, once again, we keep talking about Coach Terry, they're not tanking, and nobody's tanking for him. And you can see that, like you said, in the way they're hitting, the way they're, congratulating each other. You can see it on the sideline with Coach Terry congratulating the players, and all of those things where I feel like the energy and the vibe that they're feeding off of each other. And they're just that camaraderie. It's something about when you start playing together as a unit. And, like you talked on, we don't know if it was perfection, whether it was just guys trying to do individual things as opposed to a group. But that's what I feel like. I just see guys that are in communication and starting to really put each other in position to make plays, whether or not it's them individually themselves, but they're doing their job.
Melinda here in the comments section saying a well-coached game. I agree. Shout out to Justin Lustig. The special teams unit has been very good and very consistent the entire season. At one point, I was saying the best coordinator on this staff is Justin Lustig. Jim Knowles and company have stepped it up. And you've seen how the same way the offensive scheme has been simplified, the defensive scheme has been simplified, but also they've learned the system, I think, as the season has gone on. And you're starting to see a team that's like, we get it. It's clicking. Amari Campbell had himself a hell of a game at middle linebacker, and he really is the great communicator, to use your terminology there. In this game, Penn State held Nebraska to 131 yards rushing. Mind you, 52 of those came on one carry from Johnson early on. So his 103 yards, 52 of them come on one play. So you take that away, he averaged about 2.5 yards per carry against Penn State after that first big explosive of the game. And then for Johnson, his receiving total, 48 yards. He got 22 of them on one catch. So Johnson was limited outside of two bursts, really. Penn State did a nice job there. You get 3 sacks, 6 tackles for loss. You hold ultimately Nebraska to 9 of 18 on third down and 1 of 6 on fourth down. It's very impressive, I think, the way that they played. Another comment here, the defense gave me Manny Diaz vibes in some respects. Blitz here, pressure there, a complete game changer this time around. Deon, it seemed to me like early on in the season, we were kind of worried that the defensive line was not what we expected it to be and that they couldn't get home with 3 or 4. And as the season has gone on, granted, the caliber of opponent has changed, but you saw how Penn State was blitzing more against Indiana, having success, doing the same against Michigan State, but also Michigan State really struggling this year. Penn State able to get home with 4. And this game, it felt like you saw Knowles trust his defensive line a little bit more. And as I mentioned, DDS and Durant just did their thing. Do you think overall just that evaluation was correct about the defensive line, and it just took them a minute to put it all together?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough to say. Obviously, we know that how talented they are, right? It's just been great to see it against a different caliber. But I think this is what we wanted to see earlier, right? It's just like, hey, we should be able to get home with at least 2 guys that were very thought likely to leave last year and not even come back to go to the NFL because they're that talented. So to be able to see them kind of, whether once again it's the defensive schemes and things, but now it seems to be clicking where they're getting home some. Then there's also some pressure, so maybe not everything is just on their shoulders. Where it's like, hey, we're always trying to get home with just 4. Mix in some pressures and get that going. So now we kind of, we can rely on a little bit of both. So I think, early I just feel like, leaning on them a lot, and we just weren't getting home and we weren't adding pressures in and things like that because we just knew how talented they were. And I think now you're starting to see, and I think that was a great comment with like kind of the Manny Diaz, like, because now you're starting to see those nickel corners come in and some guys get in there pretty quick. And then now we're backing off with a zone and now they're getting home. And I think it's just starting to really mix it up, which is also what we talked about. It can make it very confusing for a guy like him from Nebraska that was young in the game and kind of seeing all those different pressures. And then that defense starts getting home. And then at that home crowd, senior night, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, you could feel it was emotional, and it was really cool to see Drew Allard there on the sideline supporting the team. Obviously didn't want his last game at Penn State to end the way that it did, going down with an injury, but still really cool to see that he supported the team and been there down to the end there for senior night. Yvonne Kamaju had himself a really good game. Chaz Coleman was not available for this game, was out, but you still had a really good performance from the defensive line. Maddie saying DDS showed up. He absolutely did. One question here from Maddie, and this is what I wanted to get to with the head coach search. Maddie saying, quote, "Look, I love Coach Terry, but in my opinion, we still got to check every box and open every door in this coaching search." To that point, it was reported earlier on today by Landon Tangwall and his sources that apparently Penn State has reached out to interview Washington Commanders wide receiver and wide receivers coach and Penn State legend Bobby Ingram. And the reaction to that on social media was mixed, in that there's a feel-good element to it. Deon, former Letterman, legendary wide receiver, one of the first great wide receivers at Penn State. But it was almost a reaction of, okay, we don't need to call everyone. And that's no disrespect to Bobby. It's more so you're calling a wide receivers coach, and I think the expectation is you're going to get an established head coach at the college level, the NFL level, wherever it is, that could potentially turn this thing into the winner, into the national championship program that Penn State fans want to see. And there's obvious questions with a guy who's never been a head coach at the college level. So in terms of Penn State turning over every stone, you and I have talked about some of the names that they've talked to. It sounds like Penn State is turning over every stone, but are you beginning to be potentially worried that it's like, hey, you're talking to everybody, and eventually you got to pick somebody, because if you continue talking to people, it's maybe indicative that you haven't found who you like yet.
Yeah, and obviously those are just reports that we get. So, I think it's going to be a very important hire. So I do think they're doing their due diligence like that, and obviously I think what we've come to expect, to your point, is an established head coach from somewhere, or like an established coordinator,
right?
Right. So like when you're getting in position coaches, I can see where the concern comes from of like, obviously it's a big program, have a great tradition, and it eases people to feel like, okay, we have a guy that has been here before that knows what they're doing. Because I even think that's part of probably what the knock on Coach Terry is about, not having been at this level, I think, coordinator at Penn State at least, or anything like that, even though he's been doing a great job here. But just that you have that sentiment, that's just shows that people are really looking for, and obviously the people aren't selecting, but when you're just talking about media, people are looking for an established coach or coordinator of some sort that's been at that level, that can kind of hit the ground running and obviously deal with, Penn State and all the resources that we have, and kind of not, and this is not to say this is what's happening, but kind of not a shot in the dark type of person, which when you talk about like, talking to all these people and things like, hey, like, let's, to your point, like, let's relax. We have a name brand here that people want to be at. Let's just kind of pick our kind of whatever number is a good number, and let's talk to them, and let's not just kind of do everything. So I trust in the staff, and hopefully in that decision making process, right, from the outside. But I'm very interested, just like everybody else, to see which way it goes. But I do personally think it'll be an established coordinator or head coach.
And this question was asked earlier on. I want to get back to this comment here. The fans shouted Terry, Terry, Terry after the game, and even the players showed off a hire Terry Smith sign on TV. Given the games, quote, Terry has coached thus far, is he a legitimate contender? I believe Terry's a legitimate contender at this point. I don't know what the expectation was from Pat Kraft this season in terms of what would Terry Smith have to do to get the job. I don't know if anybody expected this team after losing Drew Aller to go on the road and beat Iowa in Iowa City. I don't think anybody expected this team to go to Columbus and beat the number one team in the country in Ohio State. Very few of us expected Penn State to be highly competitive with the number two team in the country, Indiana, at home. And then finally getting the win against Michigan State, now getting another win against Nebraska. If the expectation that Pat Kraft has is like, hey, as long as Terry gets us stable and playing respectable, tough, gritty Penn State football again, and they qualify for a bowl game, maybe that's enough, but I'm not Pat Kraft. I don't know what the answer to that is. I've said it before. I will say it again. If you're interviewing this many people, you don't know who the person is. The person is probably already on the staff, and his name is Terry Smith. Sit tight with him for at least 2026. See how it goes. If it's a disaster, you have your answer. If it's a success, you have your answer. And if a coach comes up in the next cycle that you are in love with and you think will surpass anything Terry Smith could do, then it's your gig as AD to go hire that person. It's your prerogative. That's just how I feel. I don't know how you feel about Terry Smith being a legitimate contender for this job.
I mean, I absolutely think he is, right? And I think from that standpoint, like you said, like obviously he's come in at a tough slate in the middle of the year against a gauntlet of teams. What he's done, I think, is about the best that, just about that I think people would say, like, this would be kind of a best case scenario for him. Anything else would have been pretty amazing. So why not, right? Why does that, that wouldn't do, I don't think he's done anything to take himself off, right? And then I feel like you have the adage where obviously the players are campaigning this hard and the fans, so like they're behind him. And obviously that's a large part of it too, is right. You want your fan base, which I think is the other part of right. Leaving with Franklin is right. The fan base seemed to start waning down the end there. So right, you have your fan base that is behind him. So I don't think he's done anything to take himself off of that list. And I think to your point, it all depends on what they're aiming for. And if you continue to ask around and, interview people, maybe you're not hearing what you want, like you're saying at Penn State, or, the guy, maybe it's too early for the guy that they're aiming for, maybe still coaching somewhere else that hasn't given them answers. It's really like up in the air, but I think definitely he's a legitimate contender. Absolutely. Just because he has done nothing that would say like, nope, he can't handle this.
No, if the team had fallen off a cliff, then yeah.
Right.
But you see how things have incrementally improved. You've seen how individual players and then sides of the ball units have incrementally improved. The team has never quit. The passion has been there. The pride has been there. This could very easily have been a day where a lot of seniors who maybe decided to come back and forgo the NFL and make a run at the national title were like, hey, let's just get this over with. And it's never felt like that. It's been really nice to see. As we kind of wind down here, Deon, any other takeaways from this game, good or bad, things you like to highlight in general?
No, man, I think you just touched on one thing, is just the incrementally getting better, right? Like, and that's what you would want to see. This team is continuing to get better. I definitely think we're going to win next week. I'll just throw that out there. I think we're going to, I think we're playing really, really inspired football. Whatever the guys' motivations are, I think it's back towards we're Penn State. This is who we are. And then this is, Coach Terry's team and our team. And like, what is our, obviously it's a tough season, but what is the last couple games? What does this look like for us? So I think I just like, and I love actually that we've gotten better like this. We haven't quit. We fought hard. And I'm looking forward to like this, the last game of the season here, and then, getting to be bowl eligible and kind of building on that. And then let's get this head coaching search over with, and let's, figure it out, and let's get the, let's get the recruiting classes back. Let's have stability, and let's kind of like see what our new path forward looks like.
At the time of this recording, our friends at FanDuel don't have a line yet on Penn State versus Rutgers next weekend. That's going to be Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on Big Ten Network in Piscataway. Rutgers lost today to Ohio State by a score of 35-9. That game was 14-3 at halftime. Ohio State slowly pulled away in the second half, as they've done most of the season. And they got Lincoln Keenholz, the backup quarterback, in there, I think, late in the third quarter, if I'm not mistaken. The interesting thing about that game is no Jeremiah Smith, no Carnell Tate out due to injury. And it's interesting how Julian Sayin looked human when he didn't have two aliens to throw to. And it was interesting to me how Ohio State looked good defensively. That defense is definitely the best defense in the country. They look outstanding. They've been consistent all season long. But for everybody that's been talking about 42-9, excuse me, Ohio State ran away with it 40. I don't have this refreshed here. 42-9. Thank you. It's interesting to me looking at Ohio State without those two aliens, Smith and Tate. Do they lose to Michigan for the fifth year in a row next weekend?
Oh my gosh! Now you talk about a fan base that'll be ready to. I mean, this is almost as big as the national championship. Like, we lose to Michigan, and I say we, their fan base saying we lose to Michigan again. But I mean, without those two guys, right? That is a very different offense, as is any offense would be, right? Because those guys take up such a large chunk of production, and they're really good, rightfully so. So the guys behind them probably don't get a lot of reps. So, it obviously it changes things as far as they are offensively. To your point, defensively, they're still going to lean on that. So I still think they pull out that win just because defensively they're that good. And I think they have just enough firepower to be okay. Their defense is really, really good, and they're the type of defense that's going to keep you in a game regardless.
The game is in Michigan.
I mean, and you know what? That's one of those things too, where one, I feel like they're playing at a level where they don't care where they play. Their leader, Caleb Downs, that guy, I think he's just phenomenal, just like, everybody can see. And I think he's the type of guy that's the leader of, like, hey, wherever we're at, and they obviously have other good players, but I think he's the type of guy you follow his lead, right? And they'll rally around that and just like, hey, I know it's the whole we've lost this many times here that it don't matter. We've got our guys. We're here to play, and that's kind of reminds me of something like the senior leadership my last year with when it was myself, Derek, defensive side of the ball, we had guys. So I mean, it was just that senior leadership that we had. You could lean on because we have been through a lot of games before.
Today, Penn State gets its second consecutive win, its second consecutive Power 4 and Big Ten win. Penn State improves to 5-6, defeats now 7-4 Nebraska by a score of 37-10 at night in a whiteout on senior night. Penn State has to win on the road against Rutgers next weekend in order to become bowl eligible. We will have a full preview of that game, a full recap next weekend of Penn State versus Rutgers. This has been a very tumultuous and emotional season for Penn State football, the entire fan base, and we've been having a lot of fun covering it here. So, Deon, I appreciate you. Thank you to our sponsors, FanDuel. We invite you to play your game and tune in next time for State of State, a Penn State football show.